It's January, the city is gray but lively, and he and I have the exact same birthday. Yes, dramatic, I know. We met through mutuals. He came to my little art show, clapped a little too loudly like he was my #1 fan, and bought me spiders. No, not real spiders, little chocolate spiders for the table. He was sweet. He remembered weird little things I said, and brought my favorite snack without me asking. I thought, bueno, maybe this is something. He even asked me to be his girlfriend in that clumsy, adorable way where I half said yes because I was flattered. Fast forward a couple months, and I tell him I'm moving back to Chicago. Long story, family reasons, some paperwork, the usual life shuffling. I said it softly, like a person afraid to break a fragile thing. He listened, then smiled like everything would be fine, and for a while it was. But then something snapped in him that felt like a switch. It wasn't a loud fight. It didn't explode like in those novellas. No, it turned quiet and heavy and weird. He started doing this thing where he'd ask me questions that weren't questions. They were traps. "How long have you been thinking about this?" he'd say. "When were you planning to tell me?" He said it like I'd secreted a betrayal in my handbag. That night at dinner he tried to make me read his emotion like it was a menu. "You can't leave me like this," he said. I told him the truth. I'm scared of long distance. I have paperwork and a kid and logistics to think about. But he didn't want talk. He wanted answers that fit into his story. The actual nightmare starts when I found out I was pregnant. End of August, my period was late. I freaked out, did a test, and it was positive. My mind did this weird flip like when a song changes key and your whole body notices. I knew instantly what he would think. I knew it would complicate everything. I didn't know then how little control I would have over my own body. I told him. I said it gently, because I still wanted him to be human about it. His first reaction was weirdly clinical. That wouldn't fit my lifestyle. I cannot have a child. He said it like he was explaining a math problem. I asked him, "Do you want children?" And he answered like it was a joke about future plans. "No, not now." But then he told me straight face, "You're getting an abortion." Not "we'll talk." Not "what do you want?" He told me like he owned the calendar for my uterus. I remember the room spinning like a low-budget earthquake. I won't lie, I felt crushed. I have a kid already. I know what the choice would mean emotionally and practically. I was torn. The idea of making a decision alone while some man tells me what to do felt like being strangled with a polite ribbon. He said he'd pay. He said it would be done in his state, because here it's illegal. Which, for us, meant more logistics and pressure, and suddenly I'm signing up for travel without thinking. He painted it as help, as care. In reality, it felt like a shove. During the week while the pills were arriving, he was a masterclass of coercion. He texted nonstop, playing victim, mixing, "I'm sorry," with "this is best for both of us." He called my friends, not directly to pressure them, but to create the impression that everyone agreed it was the right move. He sent me links, websites, messages with PDFs that read like a manual. "This is how we do it, trust me." He told me if I kept this baby it would ruin both our lives, and that I would be a martyr for something I didn't ask for. He kept saying, "It's your choice, but you know it's the right one," until the phrase started to sound like a command. Then the kicker. While we were coordinating the logistics, dates, planes, his suggestions for clinics, he posted photos on Snapchat with another girl. Like photos. Smiles. Look who popped by energy. He never posted me. He posted her. He filmed a little video at a cafe with her, and of course he tagged it. It felt like salt in an open wound. I confronted him. "Why are you posting this?" He said placid. "She's a friend, a fan. She came by." His calm made me feel like I'd misinterpreted my own relationship. But I have instincts, my stomach twisted. I want you to feel what this pressure is like. Someone telling you what to do with the most intimate part of your body, while simultaneously acting like they have zero responsibility for how their words land. He kept making plans as if my life were a schedule to be edited. "You'll come here, we'll handle it, no drama." Like I was a file to be archived. That's not love, y'all. That's a takeover. I almost gave in entirely because he was loud with insistence and quiet with promises. I almost let fear and the convenience of a man's money decide for me. But in the middle of that fog, I paused. I thought about my daughter and about the future and about all the tiny ways men have told me, my way or nothing. I realized I deserved to make the call with my head clear, not because someone else stacked the deck. So I refused. I told him no. I said, "I need time. I need to be the one who decides." He didn't take it well. He called me hysterical names later. "You're being selfish. You're irresponsible." and tried to weaponize every insecurity he could find. He even tried to tell me my daughter didn't matter in this decision, which was a new low. I called my sister, who shouted at him on speaker until he hung up like a toddler. I called my best friend, who sat with me while I cried on the bathroom floor, and then got me a chicken soup. That's when the real gaslighting kicked in. He switched from angry to charming to apologetic. He said, "I'll support you whatever you choose." Then the next day he'd tell my mom she's unstable, as if slandering me could force compliance. He created a net of social pressure, so I felt like I was under a spotlight. He made me doubt my courage, then told me I was weak for doubting. I live in Seoul, Hongdae area, and like most of us I swipe, chat, drink too much soju on weekends, the usual. I matched this guy on an app, not going to say which, privacy people. He'd done his military service already, important here, you know, and he was polite, funny, the kind who says I like movies, and actually knows the director, not just the line. He gave me flowers like a rom-com, surprised me with small snacks I like, came to my small art exhibit thing, and clapped like he was my #1 fan. I thought, wow, maybe finally someone normal. We started seeing each other a lot. Dates were sweet. He'd show up with instant ramen and a grin, or with a little kimbap he bought from some hole in the wall. He called often on Kakao, of course, left voice notes with little silly songs, and sometimes sent photos of the dog he babysat. Everything felt gentle and steady. I was like, Omo, this feels safe. In Korea, safe is rare and precious, okay? So I let myself relax. One day he asked if I had Snapchat. Now, Snapchat isn't super common here. Everyone is on Kakao, Instagram too, but I did have an old Snapchat account, left from high school days with weird filters and a couple embarrassing memories. I told him, mostly I use Kakao, and he goes, add me. Fine. It felt normal. I added him, thinking nothing of it. A little later, I get a snap. I open it, and I will never, ever forget this, it was him. Having sex. With another woman. Clear as daylight. No camera tricks. No old tape excuse. He'd sent it with a line like, "Can I do this to you?" And he sent it to me. Me. Like it was part of the flirting menu. If you are Korean and you grew up with polite boundaries, imagine this. You are being shown what he does to other girls and asked to consent to the same. That's not a joke. That's not even an aphrodisiac. That is weaponized humiliation. I stared at my phone. My hands went cold. Then hot. Then I started laughing, hysterically, because the brain sometimes chooses comedy before comprehension. Then I got angry. Like, genuine, clenched teeth angry. First instinct, block. But I didn't. I stared at the video for a second more, not because I wanted to watch, God no, but because I was trying to understand the audacity. Why would you send that? Was it a test? A dare? Some juvenile attempt at dominance? He followed the ugly snap with a text. Can I do this to you? As if that cleaned it up. As if there's some consent in a video and a question after. I did the only sane thing in the moment. I closed the app, took a deep breath, and blocked him on Snapchat. But of course, blocking on one platform isn't a shield. I blocked his phone number on my Kakao, then blocked him on Instagram, then on Facebook. I thought that would be it. I went to bed, tried to sleep, put on some music. But a few hours later, my phone started blowing up from unknown numbers and from brand new accounts. He had created a text now number, or something like it, a disposable line, and started spamming me. Why you block me? I'm sorry, you overreacted, please unblock. Then he found my Instagram and messaged there. Then he found my email and sent a long message with apologies that felt like excuses. This is what made the whole thing terrifying. He didn't accept my no. He kept trying to muscle past it, using every little corner of the internet. He had the resourcefulness of someone used to following through, which makes sense, because discipline in the army gives you skills. But he used those skills to be invasive, not protective. He tried to normalize his actions by rewriting the script. First apology, then accusation. You're overreacting, it was a joke. Classic move. Then charm, then insistence. It was like he was trying every category in the emotional manipulation dictionary until one stuck. Korean social media culture makes this worse in a way. Profiles are public, mutual friends overlap, and content circulates easily if someone decides to be malicious. I felt exposed. I'd share a video of my cat on Instagram, and some new account could slide into my DMs with a threat. It's a small, modern kind of stalking. He messaged my coworkers. One of them later told me he'd seen messages and blocked the account. and left comments on old posts in a way that was designed to be seen. He wanted me to know he was there. He wanted to control the narrative. What did I do? I documented everything. Scam shots, dates, times, messages. I told close friends and family. I made a short list of the platforms he'd used and printed it out. I considered going to the police, and in Seoul, the cybercrime unit does take messages like that seriously if you have proof of harassment. I also considered legal routes. But I started with my inner circle. I told my sisters, my closest friends, my boss, who was supportive and said, block him and tell me if he comes near the office. One of my friends is a cop, off duty, and she walked me through how to file a report if it escalated. That made me feel less alone. And it did escalate a bit. For weeks he hopped accounts and sent me messages of different tones. Sometimes apology, sometimes entitlement. Once he even commented beneath a public video of mine with a jokey line that would have been funny if not for the context. Each slip was a reminder that a person who thinks they can send intimate videos to someone they claim to like also thinks they can cross boundaries repeatedly. I won't lie, it affected me. I started changing my routines a little, taking different streets sometimes, not posting stories that showed me alone at night, turning off location tags. It's silly sad how privacy becomes tiny and precious after someone decides they can trespass it. I had to do little protective things that made me feel soothed. And I had to accept that not everyone who appears romantic is capable of respecting you when you say no. Eventually, the campaign of messages slowed. Maybe he ran out of energy. Maybe someone called him out. Maybe he realized he couldn't import consent by force. Either way, the messages stopped. I blocked the last account, threw away the idea of what we could have been, and sat with my feelings. I was angry, embarrassed, and weirdly relieved. I kept the screenshots because sometimes evidence is power. I tell this story now because I know a lot of Korean women will nod. This type of boundary breach isn't rare. It's one more version in a long list of ways we are expected to perform forgiveness. We're taught to be polite, to de-escalate, to smile. But consent is not a favor. It's a boundary. And sending someone a sex video of yourself as a pickup line is not bold. It's disrespectful and abusive. I gotta tell you about the time I invited a guy back to my flat, and my 2 roommates were completely smashed and making TikTok noises like their lives depended on it. This one still makes me want to laugh, and then quietly plot how to burn my phone. Okay, let me set the scene for you. Cape Town, a sleepy Saturday, my flat near Long Street. Small, warm, a little art on the walls. The kind of place you can smell bray coals on the weekend and hear a seagull arguing with a gull. I work in an NGO, which means during the week I look like a tidy, slightly stressed adult. On weekends, I put on something cute and unthreatening and act like I'm normal. So I matched Daniel. After a couple of hours I said over messaging, "If you want, come back to mine, we can put a movie on." I honestly didn't expect him to say yes, but he did. Simple. No drama. I texted my roommates, as you do. "Hey babes, bringing a date back, cool?" They said cool, in that ambiguous tone that translates to, "We might be very drunk, hoer." I shrugged it off because they'd been like that before, and usually chill. Famous last words. We get back to the flat. The living room is a circus. Imagine, empty wine bottles like modern art, fairy lights hanging like they forgot how to be subtle, and my 2 roommates, Saad and Toomey, sitting on the floor with their hair a mess and faces glowing red from too much cheap rose. They're doing those TikTok things, you know, the silly noises and the little hand dances, and they're loud in a way that fills the apartment like a pan on a fire. I try to do the polite, adult thing. "Hey guys, this is Daniel, he's my date." They squeal like a gaggle of excited seagulls. "Ooh, he's cute," Saad says, and then she accidentally starts making one of those odd TikTok squeaks that's supposed to be funny, but is actually the acoustic equivalent of nails on a blackboard. Daniel smiles politely, but I see him shrink a little. He's clearly embarrassed, which is fine. Who wouldn't be? But then, and here's the part that still makes me grind my teeth, he starts to lean in like, "Oh, we can watch a movie." And before I can even say, "Yes, let's put on the film," he makes the kind of move where he puts his arm around me. Not a gentle, check the vibes arm. No, it's the kind of arm that says, "I don't need consent." You know the one. It's the arm that assumes the room is his and your background noise. I'm like, "No, not loud. Not dramatic. Just a calm, flat no." I pull away. He falters. For a second I think maybe he'll check himself. Maybe he'll laugh nervously and say, "Ah, my bad, Saz." But instead he tries that old move, the smile, the shrug, the "oh come on, put the film on later." He tries to gaslight me with the classic, "You're being funny, relax." Brew, I have zero time for that. Meanwhile, my roommates are unbothered, or too drunk to notice, and they keep making those annoying high-pitched TikTok sounds, the kind that sound like someone trying to summon a genie from a blender. Daniel uses that noise as cover. He makes a clumsy advance, assuming the chaos equals permission. Like because there are loud giggles in the kitchen, I want to be groped in my living room. Logic. At that moment, I remembered two things. One, I was raised in a home where boundaries were very real, and two, I would not be the woman who lets someone cross mine and then laugh it off later like it was my fault. I stand up. I put on the voice I use for the office when clients try to lowball our project fees. Calm, authoritative, no nonsense. "Darling," I say, "this isn't the time. Sit down. If you want to stay for the movie, great. But we do not touch without asking. That's the rule." He actually tried to argue. He said something about vibes, and you looked like you wanted it. Absolute classic. I looked at him and said, "Mate, that's on you. Read a room. Read a human. If you can't, then tonight is not your night." I could see him doing the mental math. Keep pushing and maybe it will work. Back off and try again later. My hand had already made the decision for me. I was packing my dignity into a small polite envelope and slipping it back into the night. I told him to leave. Not in a dramatic get-out way, but in that steady tone that means I am finished negotiating. He left sulking, like he was denied a treat he thought was guaranteed. He later texted me asking if he could come back and finish the movie another time. I did what any sane person would do. I ignored him. Blocked him on socials. Blocked his number. Classic move, instant relief. Now I know some people would say, but Saad and Toomey, they were drunk. True. But the part that burnt me was not their drunkenness. It's the fact that the man used their behavior as an excuse. He saw chaos and thought chaos meant consent. Wrong. End of story. Consent doesn't come from ambient noise or a messy room. Consent comes from an explicit, mutual yes. Simple. After that night, the flat was a mess for a bit. We woke up the next morning and had the hangover trio: regret, laughter, and full-blown embarrassment. Saad apologized, half sincere, half still a bit fuzzy. Toomey, bless her, was mortified when she remembered she'd made a duet of some cringy sound with Daniel in the background. We tidied up, drank water, and I made coffee that tasted like petty triumph. I told them what happened, not to shame them for being drunk, but to highlight the way their antics made someone assume he could overstep. They felt terrible. We set a new rule. If a date is coming over, we keep the high-pitched noises in the bedroom, or at least save them for a time when guests aren't present. Right. You think you've had a bad date? Grab a cup of tea, a blanket, emotional support, maybe a therapist, because this one was genuinely criminal. And no, I don't mean like actual crime, although emotional damage should have its own charge, honestly. I mean in the sense that this man left me on a pavement like an unwanted Tesco bag, then had the audacity to message me later like nothing had happened. So this was about 2 years back, right? The world had just reopened after lockdown. Everyone was feral, and dating apps were the wild west of emotionally unavailable men in skinny jeans. I matched with this bloke on Bumble. Let's call him, I don't know, Jeremy, but like a Jeremy who drinks craft beer and thinks rye bread is a personality trait. His profile said things like, heavy checkmark, looking for someone who loves spontaneous adventures. Heavy checkmark, fluent in sarcasm. Heavy checkmark, I make the best hot chocolate. Which, looking back, should have been a red flag. Men who brag about hot chocolate are either serial killers or will ghost you for their ex. No in between. Anyway, we chat for a week. It's actually decent. No eggplant emojis, no you up. At 1 a.m., no weird conspiracy theories about lizard governments. He even used punctuation, the bare minimum, but king behavior by modern dating standards. We decide to meet for drinks in Shoreditch, because of course, that's where every emotionally unavailable man in London lives part-time like it's a habitat. I put effort in, yeah. Like effort. Hair curled. Nice top. Jeans without stains. I even wore the boots that pinch, just to look fit. He said 7 p.m. at some trendy bar with plants growing out of the walls and cocktails named things like Existential Crisis or Daddy Issues Number 3. I get there 6:55 p.m. because I'm punctual, unlike every man I've ever met, and I see him. And to be fair, he looked like his photos. Already winning. Tallish, brown hair, had that artsy, I might play guitar but might also ruin your life vibe. He stands up, smiles, and does the half-hug, cheek-kiss thing we all secretly panic about every time. We sit down. We order drinks. Everything's actually good. Like suspiciously good. We're chatting, laughing, swapping embarrassing stories. He told me about the time he accidentally got too high on edibles at a family barbecue and thought his aunt was speaking in owls. I told him about the time I walked confidently into a push door only to bounce off it like a pigeon. Peak British bonding moment. Then the bill comes. I reach for my purse because I'm not a heathen, but he goes, No, I've got the first round. Oh, gentlemen. Okay. Green flag. Noted. But the date's ending soon, and I say I'm gonna pop to the loo first. I stand up, wobble slightly because the cocktails were stronger than my emotional boundaries, and say, Don't run away, yeah? He laughs. Wouldn't even dream of it. Famous. Last. Words. I go to the bathroom, compose myself, debate if I should drunk text my group chat yet, decide against it, come back. And the seat is empty. His jacket? Gone. His drink? Gone. His entire human presence? Deleted from the venue like a Snapchat message. I blink. Once. Twice. No man. I look around thinking he's maybe at the bar. Maybe he went to the loo. Maybe he got kidnapped. Maybe the floor opened up and swallowed him into the London Underground. I ask the bartender, Sorry, did you see the guy I was with? Brown hair, emotionally ambiguous face. Bartender gives me that pitted smile you give a woman whose date has evaporated into thin air. Yeah, he paid his half and left about 5 minutes ago. Paid his half. Not even mine. Not even the bare minimum courtesy ghost payment. This man did a dine and dash emotionally and financially. I just stood there like a sim whose command got cancelled mid-action. Right? I said. Cool. Love that for me. I paid for my drink, walked out, stood on the pavement, inhaled the polluted London air, and genuinely questioned every life choice I'd ever made, including the fringe I had in year 7. I text my best mate immediately. Me, he left. As in physically left. Like I died and he moved on. Her, wait what? Where are you? Me. On the street like a discarded receipt. I wasn't even mad yet. I was flabbergasted. Gobsmacked. Bewildered. Hornswoggled. The full British thesaurus of shock. I get home, remove the boots of betrayal, scrub the clown makeup off my soul, and I think, right? Block, delete, mourn, move on. But I know. Because about 11 p.m., nearly 3 hours later, I get a text. Not an apology. Not an explanation. Not a sorry I left you at a table like soggy chips. No. This man texts, and I quote, You should come over, we could watch a movie? Full stop. No shame. No awareness. No survival instinct. I stared at my phone like it had grown a face. I reread it out loud. I said it slowly. I held space for it. I checked if maybe I'd misread reality. I didn't. My thumbs unlocked a new level of petty I didn't know I had. I typed back, Babe, you left me at the restaurant. Are you alright emotionally? He replies, I thought we could just hang after. Not, sorry. Not, are you okay? Not, my bad, I panicked and sprinted into the night like a Victorian ghost. Just confusion. Like I was the unreasonable one. I sent, Jeremy, you walked out while I was in the bathroom. Sir, you abandoned me like I was compost. And he says, it wasn't that deep. Ah, the mating call of the emotionally stunted. I wrote back. It was literally a scheduled date. We were mid-conversation. That is the deepest shallow thing you could have done. Then he sends, well, you still want to come over? I genuinely laughed. Out loud. Alone. In my kitchen. Like a woman starring in a psychological drama filmed by the BBC. I replied, No, Jeremy. I do not want to come over. I want you to reflect on your behavior, maybe journal, and take up therapy. Then, and this was the most powerful thing I've ever done in my entire life, I blocked him mid-typing bubble. The catharsis? Immaculate. Chef's kiss. October 10th would recommend. Now, do I still cringe when I walk past that bar? Yes. Do I sometimes reenact the story in the shower like it's a monologue? Also yes. But do you know what hurts more than rejection? The audacity. So if you ever think your love life is bad, just remember. Somewhere in London, there is a man named Jeremy who thinks disappearing mid-date and then asking for Netflix is a valid flirting strategy. And if he ever approaches me again, I will vanish faster than he did, but with better timing and emotional maturity. You think dating in Paris is all wine and poetry? Darling, sit down and pour yourself a proper café, because this one will make you spit out your croissant. I dated a man used very lightly here, who turned IKEA into a full-blown audition for being an emotional toddler. It started all cute and cliché, and then it derailed into classic immaturity and passive-aggressive nonsense. Comme d'habitude. I'm a UX designer. I work from cafes when I can. I wear a blazer that looks effortless, and I judge people quietly for not knowing how to fold a map. He matched me on an app. His photos had that "I like food markets and long walks" energy that Parisians fake for Instagram. We messaged, Ms. Amos said "Vas why?" And I went. We arranged a second date at IKEA. Yes, IKEA. Why? Because I said I needed a lamp, and I thought, why not make IKEA boring domesticity into an adventure? Plus, it's cheap and safe, and you can test compatibility by seeing if someone folds flat back without cursing. We met at the Porte de Clignancourt entrance because honestly IKEA being outside the périphérique is a test of commitment in itself. He was early. Punctuality is a good start. He smiled in that Rue Café kind of way, the one that says, I have opinions about cheese and I will share them. We grabbed a trolley like two sensible little adults and started walking through the showroom like it was a maze of domestic possibility. At first, he seemed fun. He jumped on the display beds because why not? A little childish energy can be charming, right? He tried sitting in the swing chairs, made a joke about going full Scandinavian minimalist, and I laughed because it was cute. We were playful, steering between linen and lamps, and I thought, hey, this might be a love story in the making. Then he started doing the overgrown child thing. At first it was an elbow nudge when I picked a pillow. Little. Innocuous. Oh la la, I said. Then he started jumping on the sofa displays, flopping around like a teenager on a trampoline, and it went from charming to embarrassing in a heartbeat. I told him politely, non pas trop, because I'm not there to supervise a grown man's playground exploits. He laughed it off and said he was just being silly. I shrugged. Jokes are fine. But then he began to push boundaries to get a reaction. And that, my friend, is where the red flags bloom like mildew in a damp cupboard. On the tram ride home we talked about work. He said he had projects and creative energy, and I nodded while he scrolled on his phone like he was busy. Fast forward a few days. We decided to do a co-working day at my flat because I had a big presentation, and he said he wanted to support me. I opened my tiny balcony door to let in the Paris afternoon light and set up my laptop. He arrived with 2 laptops, hypocrisy on his back, and an overconfident smile. At first, fine. He set up his workstation, but it was performative. 1 laptop supposedly for work, another for distracting him from doing any actual work. He played Spotify, not music for concentration, but playlists that sounded like he was always in La Belle Evie, sipping something expensive. He spent an hour scrolling, then started poking me. Literally poking my arm, like a kid on the school bus. Regard CA, he would say, and then poke. It was irritating, but I tried to be patient. I have deadlines, I can be zen. Then the first flip, he flicked me with a pencil. Not a joke. A flick that left a sting. I looked up and he grinched like, oh, it was nothing, you're so sensitive. Not sensitive, boundaries. He then flipped me off as a joke, like naughty schoolyard banter, and laughed when I looked offended. That was it. That tiny, childish middle finger felt like a tiny declaration of disrespect. It was like a litmus test. If I showed discomfort, he could escalate, because the next move would show him whether I'd actually stand up for myself. I told him straight, that's rude. He put on the wounded, I'm just joking face. But the jabs continued. He shoved me with his shoulder when we walked across my living room. Not hard, just enough to make me stumble. And then he would do a little laugh like it was playful. He loved testing limits. He called it banter. I called it exhausting. There's always the push-pull. You tell yourself maybe he's nervous, maybe he's immature but can grow. But the thing about immaturity is it often comes with entitlement. He started equating my reactions with being difficult. Why do you get so serious? He mouthed when I told him it wasn't funny. He would cross a line and then tilt his head and say, with total self-confidence, test dramatique. As if my feelings were a performance for his amusement. And there was an escalation. One afternoon he poked me in the side, hard enough to make me gasp. I flinched and said, yes, I said calmly, stop. He smirked and went, come on, you were smiling earlier. Men like that always think they own the right to define your face. So I packed up my work and left. Not dramatic. I calmly closed my laptop like I do when architecture software crashes, and I walked out. But he followed me, all dramatics and apologies, making himself the victim. You left me here. Why are you so cold? Classic tactic. Make the abuser feel abandoned. I gave him one chance, the kind many of us give, a conversation. I said, look, I like you, but I don't like being disrespected. If you can't stop mocking my reactions or poking me like a child, I can't be around you. He made the cutest, most manipulative face and promised to change. He said all poets swear they will be better. I believed him enough to stay because I can be hopeful and naive. But hope is not a plan. His change was a weekend brochure, pretty but empty. He did not change. If anything, he doubled down. The more I asked for adult behavior, the more he performed childishness as an act of rebellion. Once, after I told him I was not cool with pushing, he vaulted the doorway like a toddler trying to jump over a puddle and then sneered, "Oh, are we doing rules now?" He turned my request for respect into a game he could win by being obstinate. One evening, bitten with this small anger that grows like a city's damp, I just said, "That's it. I'm done." He looked hurt and theatrically shocked like someone in a bad soap. He asked why, tried to make me explain my entire life history, as if I was a thesis defense. I said calmly, because I want a person who shows up, who listens. Not someone who makes jokes at my expense. He rolled his eyes and called me serious again. I walked him to the door and said, "Bonsoir," with the coldest kind of politeness. He lingered, then said, "We can be friends," as if that was an easy fallback. I wanted to tell him, no, friendship is not an option when one person treats the other like a toy. But in Paris we are polite even when cutting someone out. We say bon courage and move on. So we are in suburban Atlanta. I was a kid then, all elbows and braces, trying to be grown up in sneakers I couldn't afford. He, let's call him Marcus, was the kind of guy folks said was different. Quiet in math class, always near the back of the auditorium, smiled in a way that made your knees forget how to walk. Rumors floated, you know how it is, whispered like weather reports. He's gay, people said in that hush that's more accusation than information. I didn't want to believe it. Not because it mattered to me really, but because I liked having the last piece of a secret. Curiosity slid into my bones like summer sweat. One late afternoon we were at his mama's house because that's where he lived, near the stop sign with the rusted mailbox. Her house smelled like lemon oil and boiled collards, like church and prayer, and the kind of neatness that makes you feel exposed. His mom had a bathroom that always looked like a shrine to domesticity, fluffy towels folded with military perfection, the kind of knickknacks that know their place. A little radio hummed gospel in a corner. Marcus led me there like we were sneaking off to plot an adventure. I remember how small my question was. I didn't mean anything by it. It came out like a tablespoon of sugar stirred into tea. "So, you ever, dated a guy?" I thought I was being gentle, a soft prod to pry open the truth. The air held like the minute before lightning. Marcus's face, usually unreadable, lit up all sudden as if someone had thrown open the blinds. His smile was this ridiculous, relieved, almost worshipful thing, like the sun had finally shown up for his private backyard picnic. Then he ran. Not a stroll, full speed, the kind of sprint that gets the neighbors gawking. He disappeared into his mama's bathroom and came back with something tucked under his arm like a trophy. It was her hairbrush, old wooden handle, bristles full and slightly splayed. It had the faint sheen of a thing used and kept. He held it out to me like it was the only honest thing he'd ever owned. I'll be honest, my first reaction was confusion so thick I could taste it. Not even discomfort, more like surprise at the sudden turn of plot. But in that blink between confusion and understanding, Marcus's entire face said please. There was yearning in his eyes, the kind of raw, unmet thing you see in people who've practiced smiles that aren't theirs. I don't know why I did what I did. Maybe because I was 17 and terrible at saying no. Maybe because the room hummed with his silence, and I wanted to fill it. Maybe because there was a strange, intimate power in following someone's odd request, like stepping into a private religion. So I took the brush. He guided me with shy, delighted nods. There was something ritualistic about it. The brush felt ordinary in my hand and monumental in the meaning he poured into it. I ran it through my hair like doing someone a favor, and the whole thing folded into itself, awkward, intimate, innocent, and not. I could feel the electricity of someone's secret being acted upon, and that was both thrilling and wrong. When I finished, Marcus didn't hug me or kiss me or make a scene. He walked briskly back into the bathroom, set the brush down on the counter exactly where it had been, like a museum curator replacing a relic, and shut the door with a quiet that looked like fulfillment. No words. No explanation. Just the soft click of the latch. I'm a university lecturer in Delhi. I spend my days lecturing about literary patterns and human narratives. The irony is delicious, because who better than a lit professor to spot a script when it's being performed on real people? I like patterns. I notice when language is repeated. I notice when gestures are copied. So when I started dating this guy, I filed him under case study in my head because something about his cadence felt rehearsed. First date, we meet at a cozy little restaurant in Hauz Khas. You know, the kind, fairy lights, overpriced chai, an ambience that says we're cultured but also broke. He orders the same instant mix of confidence and charm you see on rom-com leads. We laugh. He talks about his job in consulting with the same humble brag tone we've all heard before, and he ends the night with, "I'll call you," and a smile that seems affordably sincere. The evening is pleasant, nothing traumatic, and I leave thinking, okay, maybe. A week later, my friend Ria tells me about her own date. Same guy's name pops up. We exchange the usual jokes, and then she says casually, "He took me to the same restaurant." I blinked. Same restaurant? That's odd but not impossible. Delhi is big. Then she says, "He told me the same story about his internship in Goa." And I'm like, wait, same internship story? Same jokes? Same line to get the cheek kiss? The hairs on my arms stand up like a small warning alarm. You know how it goes in India. Gossip is an art form and friends are excellent archivists. So I start paying attention. Little things that I might have dismissed now look like stamps. A favorite phrase, "I'm just very honest, Yar." He uses it with me, and then Ria tells me he uses it with her. The tour of the apartment. Oh my God, the tour is the same. He shows the same painting, the same small bookshelf with a single Bukowski tucked in. He opens the same tiny balcony that has the best light for morning chai. And he says the same line, "We can watch a movie here someday." It's like watching a mime perform the same routine in different parks. One night Ria calls me in a whisper, because this is what girlfriends do. She tells me everything. Same restaurant, same one-liner, same "we'll cook together" line. She even had the same coffee mug on the shelf when he showed her his place, the same chipped blue mug with a little moon print. My teacher brain clicks into forensic mode. I start to catalog data points, dates, locations, lines, props. This man is not romantic. He is methodical. He isn't trying to woo, he's running a prototype. What made it worse was the ease with which he could rearrange the pieces. It wasn't even conscious, I think. It was practiced. He had found a formula that worked, a restaurant that gave him the right lighting, a few lines that earned him intimacy, a route to a kiss. And then he simply repeated it like a cookbook recipe with minor substitutions. It's a different girl each time, but he uses the same ingredients: charm, a curated vulnerability, a story about an ex that concludes with, "I learned so much." He'd finish his set, flip the table, collect the applause, and move on to the next show. It felt performative in a way that made my stomach churn. The first time it truly hit me was when I was talking to another friend, Anjali, over chai at the college canteen. Anjali's smile dropped mid-sip and she said, "He brought me to the same bar with the same playlist playing and asked me the exact same question about my mom." I nearly spat out my tea. "His mom?" I said. "Yes," she nodded. He keeps this line about how family is everything, and then he drops a casual, "So where do you see your family in 5 years?" And you know, it's like a test. A test. That's exactly how it felt. A man testing boxes to see if he could check them off. At some point this stops being an odd pattern and becomes frankly gross. Because once you realize someone is doing you like a rehearsed scene, you stop being a person and start being a role. There's no curiosity, no real listening, no messy, glorious unpredictability of two people figuring each other out. Instead, there's this cleaned-up, consumer-friendly version of connection. He literally ran a haunted house where each girl was the jump scare. I confronted him once. Not dramatically, I'm a teacher, not a TV host, but calmly. I said, "Do you have one way of dating and do you perform it for everyone?" I tried to make it sound like a sociological question, like I was testing a theory. He blinked, then laughed neatly, like a person who hadn't realized the camera was pointing at him. "What do you mean?" he said. "Classic. You sound like how I talk to everyone," he said charmingly. "Isn't it better to have a script?" He actually asked that. I felt this urge to teach him a 5-minute lecture on empathy versus efficiency, but I calmed myself and said, No, it isn't. People are not rehearsed monologues. People are messy and wonderful. They deserve attention. Later, a mutual friend told me he'd done the same thing to a woman in South Delhi, who now keeps a small list in her notes app of weird lines he used. She gave me permission to see it. It was like opening a stranger's old diary. The same phrases, the same funny but not too funny laugh, the same, "I have commitment issues" confession followed by a grand gesture. It was like seeing the blueprint for a scam, except the product was affection and the currency was time. What I hate most is not being hurt. I'm resilient. It's the way he made women doubt themselves for not being special enough. Each girl wonders if she did something wrong. Each of us reconstructs memories, stripping ourselves of agency and pretending we were just unlucky. But no, the fault is the man who copies intimacy and calls it love. He was performing love in a practice room without any intention of staying for the curtain call. So I stopped. I unfollowed, I blocked, I told my friends to be wary. We started sharing notes in a ridiculous WhatsApp chain named Script Watch. We would text each other the date, the line, the place, almost like we were amateur detectives. Part of me felt petty and small doing that, but another part of me felt like we were reclaiming our stories. We refused to be characters in his one-man show anymore. I was in Toronto. Alex slid into my DMs like a scene out of a movie. Private jet. Ken. Monaco Grand Prix. A full itinerary of yachtside glamour I'd never actually been invited to before. I told myself I was cautious, but also Monaco. The word itself sounds like liquid gold. I was curious. I asked if I could just fly from Toronto, and he was like, "Why don't you just fly private?" Who says no to a private jet? Who, honestly? So I said yes. I flew into Miami that Saturday thinking, okay, outfit planned, luggage packed, I got this. Saturday evening, silence. Sunday morning, planes delayed till tomorrow. Monday, pushed to Tuesday. Tuesday, actually Wednesday morning. Each message softened into this weird hamster wheel of hope. He wasn't malicious, he was just bad at planning. Or so I told myself. You know how you smooth over red flags because the idea is so pretty you want it to be true. By Wednesday morning I'm up at 6 a.m., makeup on, hair done, suitcase repacked like I'm an extra in a glossy travel ad. I come downstairs, his place is that Miami vibe, too cool for school, boutique hotel meets bachelor pad, and he says, "We need to talk." Which, when you're in someone's living room at dawn, is not exactly the vibe you want. He drops the bomb. There's only one seat on the jet left, and it's for me. Pause. If you still want to come when I send the itinerary, maybe. He was trying to be nice and also perfectly ruthless. That's a special brand of cruelty, telling someone they're welcome to buy back in like it's a second chance sale. I stood there like a prop. He called a car, said he'd book me a hotel for the night. One night. One hotel night and a text that said, "I'll send the itinerary later." No spending money, no explanation, no offer to sort anything. He boarded the jet and left me in Miami like I was his afterthought. I got a hotel room with one stale mini soap and a view of a brick wall. The only luxury was the fact I'd paid for my own seat, in a way, because later I would. That night, the truth seeped out through someone else's mouth. My friend, who does marketing for the company that supposedly owned the jet, texted me, "Girl, what are you on about? That's not his jet. There's space on the plane. They flew girls out. It's not a boys-only trip." The monitors in my brain flicked on. All the knots of anxiety, the tiny rationalizations, maybe he's shy, maybe it was a last-minute thing, unraveled into one plain fact. I'd been played. Let's be clear, I'm not dramatically naive. But the power of the fantasy is cunning. He sold me a mood, a movie trailer where I was the star. He built a little set around me, plain chatter, glossy promises, the pull of VIP, and I almost walked the stage. I let the excitement drown out a simple question. Why was I the only person who didn't know the plan? When he finally owned the truth over the phone, "This trip isn't for you, it's just for the boys," it was like being slapped with a napkin. Indignity tastes like hotel minibar water. He said it like it was a fact. Like, "Hey, sorry, but by the way, you were collateral." He skipped the bit where he apologized. He skipped the bit where he owned his manipulation. So here's where it gets spicy. Instead of folding into theatrical victim mode, I decided to flip the script. I wasn't going to sit in Miami nursing a bruised ego. I booked a flight, my flight, to Monaco. Yes, alone. Yes, on my own dime. Because if you promised a fantasy and left me out here with the receipt, I'll at least use the money to buy a drink with better scenery. Monaco is everything the posters whisper. Yachts with names you can't pronounce, champagne that makes your teeth sparkle, people who breathe money as if it were oxygen. I walked the marina at dusk and felt something settle in my chest. Call it vindication, call it self-respect. The lights blinked like a Morse code that said, "You did this for you." I posted a picture, just one, of the harbor and a caption that said, "Sitting on the edge of the Mediterranean, plotting my own escapades." Passive-aggressive? Perhaps. Delicious? Absolutely. I blocked him. Not because I wanted to be petty, though yes, that was a satisfying little button, but because boundaries are sexy and necessary. He was a lesson, not a lifestyle. After that, my timeline filled with advice from other women who'd been there. Ghost him, post him, outshine him, or do none of those and just laugh. The consensus was unanimous. Never let someone else rent a life for you. Own the ticket. Buy your own champagne. If someone's flex is built on borrowed glamour, it's cheap, and you deserve a first-class version of yourself. The rage didn't disappear overnight. There's a specific kind of anger reserved for people who weaponize fantasies. But it changed, it turned practical. I started asking better questions. Who actually owns the jet? Who else is going? Why am I the last to know? I learned the vocabulary of borders, my money, my agency, my time. No more boxed-in promises. No more standing on airport floors waiting for someone else to decide I exist. On the last night in Monaco, after a day of window shopping and laughing with a bartender about who actually counts as a friend in a private jet group chat, I saw him in a tagged story. Not his face, but a boat with a glossy logo and a caption bragging about the boys' trip. I sipped my drink, smiled like a woman who had been given the script and rewritten it, and then I posted another picture. Me on a random terrace, wind in my hair, the sea wide and indifferent, with a caption that read, "Booked my own seat." You think you've had a hard time dating? Girl, pull up a chair. I once went on a date with a guy who showed up with an overnight bag, and I still can't talk about it without laughing and crying at the same time. Like, honestly, what are you doing? Who brings an overnight bag to a first-ish date and thinks that's normal behavior? Spoiler, not normal. Let me tell you how it went down. So I matched this dude. He seemed fine on paper. Not a serial killer-looking profile, decent photos, the usual, I like hikes and coffee bio. We texted a little, planned a casual dinner, nothing high stakes. I got ready like a normal human being. Hair done, outfit on that says fun but not trying too hard. A little spray of perfume, the whole thing. I leave my apartment feeling cute and slightly hopeful. You've got to admit, there's always a little hope before the horror. We meet at the restaurant. He's punctual, which is a point in his column. We do the small talk, jobs, music, that awkward, what do you do for fun stretch. Conversation is okay. He's being charming enough to keep my attention. Then, because I am a walking red flag magnet, my eyes wander and I clock the bag. Not tucked under the table like a purse. Not that little hipster gym sack thing. No, this was an honest-to-God duffel, the kind with a zipper that looks like someone packed jeans and a toothbrush in it. I joked. I said, "Oh, nice bag, Jim, today?" He laughed like it was a joke and said, "Nah, just something I keep around." Cool. Fine. Maybe he's moving. Maybe he likes to sleep in hoodies. I'm not the bag police. But call it intuition or call it common sense, something in my brain went, Dinner goes on. He orders for both of us like he's the host at his own weird culinary takeover. He tells a couple of stories that are just slightly off, like he's narrating his life in third person, and the main character always gets lucky. I keep listening, smiling, trying to be polite. I go to the bathroom mid-date, because I have to pee like a human being. I come back, the food's fine, the night's fine, the bag is still there, quietly menacing. At the end of the meal we're wrapping up, and he's like, "I'll call us a car." I was like, "Sure, that's cute." He hands me his phone to put in my address. I look at him and say, "Why don't you put in your address first, and then I'll put in mine?" You'd think that was reasonable. You'd think. He gets this split-second look, irritated, almost petulant, and goes, "No, we're going back to yours." I laughed out loud. Not a nervous laugh, a flat-out, "Are you for real?" laugh. I said, No, we're not doing that. It's not a homeless shelter, sweetheart. I'm not picking up anybody's overnight bag. He tries to play it off like he's joking, like he totally gets that I'm joking. I give him the look you give someone who tries to hand you a stapler and then asks why you're not excited about their stapler collection. He keeps insisting, "It's just easier. We can hang. You can show me your place." And I'm like, "Buddy, no. But here's the part that made my skin crawl. He assumed I'd be down with it. Like he had built a narrative in his head where my boundaries are suggestions and his overnight bag is a pre-booked room in my apartment. I got this rush of protective fury, not for the date, but for my life. Who decides where they sleep without asking the person they were barely polite to? That's not chivalry, that's trespassing. So I set my boundary. I said calmly and clearly, "You're going home." "I'm going home. If you want a car, fine. Call it. But you are not coming to my place." He got louder. He tried to guilt me, played the "you're so cold" card like a broken record. That's a classic maneuver, make you feel guilty for having standards. I almost felt bad for him for 1 second, because he seemed surprised that someone would call him on his nonsense. Then I remembered the bag and how it might smell like someone else's life. He refused to call me an Uber. Straight up refused. He said, "I'm not calling you a car." Like he was punishing me for not rolling over. At that point, I laughed because what else was there to do? I feel this weird mix of anger and comedy. So I said, "Fine. I'll call my own car." I pulled out my phone, clicked the app, watched as the driver popped up 5 minutes away, and as I got in the car, he was still standing there with his duffel like a sad, confused boomerang. I left. Naturally. I texted him later that night like, "That was interesting." He tried to gaslight me, tried to make me feel wrong for not inviting him in, like I had led him on by existing. Girl, no. I shut it down. Blocked his number. Blocked social media. That overnight bag? I still picture it. That zipper. The little dent where a toothbrush must have lived. It was such a small object, but it came to mean something huge to me. A literal manifestation of entitlement. I thought I had found the one. Instead, I became the star of a joke I never agreed to be part of. I wasn't looking for anything serious when I downloaded Tinder. I had just come out of a long, draining, abusive relationship and thought maybe chatting with someone new would lift my spirits. Nothing too deep, just flirty banter, maybe the occasional drink, and someone to remind me that I was still desirable. That's when I saw him. I swiped right, and within seconds match. He messaged first. A simple, "Hey, your eyes are kind of amazing. Is that a filter, or are you just genetically superior?" It was cheesy but charming, and I laughed out loud. We started talking, and talking, and talking. It quickly became a rhythm. The good morning texts, inside jokes, late night confessions. Damon seemed to always know the right thing to say. He remembered everything I told him, from my favorite sushi roll to the name of my childhood cat. He was attentive in a way most guys online weren't. It didn't feel forced. It felt like he genuinely wanted to know me. He even sent selfies, candid ones of him at the gym, reading in bed, walking his dog. They weren't just posed thirst traps. They made him feel accessible. I began to believe he was actually too good to be true. We planned our first date after a week of nonstop messaging. I picked out my outfit the night before, couldn't sleep, and woke up early to get ready. I was nervous but excited. I arrived at the Thai restaurant we'd agreed on, heart thudding in my chest. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. I checked my phone. No call. No text. I waited an hour. Eventually I left, half embarrassed, half worried. Maybe something had happened? Maybe he was in an accident. But my gut told me something was off. Still, I didn't want to jump to conclusions. The next morning, he texted. "Sorry about last night. Family emergency. Phone died. I feel awful. Can I make it up to you?" I wanted to be mad, but his message sounded sincere. And I really liked him. Against my better judgment, I forgave him. Everyone deserves a second chance, right? We rescheduled. This time, he offered to pick me up. I thought it was sweet. He said he wanted to take care of me and make the night all about us. I was flattered. That night, I waited again. Hair done, lipstick perfect, butterflies fluttering in my stomach. He never showed. I stared out the window for hours. The phone stayed silent. That was the moment I knew something was wrong. Not just with the date, but with him. Fueled by heartbreak and confusion, I sent a message that was, admittedly, not my most composed. "If this is some kind of joke, congratulations. You got me. Now lose my number." But I wasn't prepared for the message I'd receive a few days later, from someone named Sarah. She identified herself as Damon's roommate. Her message was polite, but blunt. "Hey, I know this is weird, but I found your number in Brad's phone. Damon. His real name is Brad, and I think you deserve to know the truth. He's been using fake profiles to mess with women on Tinder as a joke. He thinks it's funny to get people emotionally invested, and then ghost them or stand them up. I'm so sorry. The words blurred on the screen. My stomach twisted. Brad. There was no Damon. The man I'd been falling for didn't exist. The photos? Stolen. The stories? Fabricated. All the thoughtful messages, the selfies, the connection I thought we had. It was a lie. I had been the unwilling participant in someone's cruel prank. I reread Sarah's message a dozen times, hoping it was a mistake. But she sent screenshots of Brad bragging to his friends, showing them my messages, laughing about how easy it was to get me hooked. One message read, "Watch her spiral when I ghost again." It's like a social experiment. I felt sick. I was humiliated. I'd opened up to this person, told him about my insecurities, my dreams. I'd let myself believe he was someone who cared about me. But to Brad, I had been a punchline, a test subject, an ego boost. The worst part? I wanted to believe something else. That maybe Sarah was lying. That maybe Damon was real. That maybe I hadn't been so naive. But the evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. The betrayal wasn't just about being stood up. It was deeper than that. It was psychological, emotional, intimate. I hadn't just been ghosted, I'd been played. I deleted Tinder that night, and for weeks I couldn't stop replaying every message, every moment, wondering how I missed the signs. Was I so desperate for connection that I ignored the red flags? Did I really believe someone that perfect would fall for me so quickly? Was it my fault? I spiraled. I stopped answering texts from friends. I didn't go out. I barely ate. I felt violated, foolish, and isolated. Eventually, I told one of my closest friends what happened. She was furious, not at me, but at him. "This isn't your fault," she insisted. "This isn't about you being gullible. This is about him being cruel." She was right. It took me a while to understand that. That emotional manipulation, especially under the guise of romance, is abuse. And it can leave scars just as deep as the physical kind. Over time, I started healing. I began therapy. I reconnected with the people I'd pushed away. I even started journaling again, something I hadn't done since high school. Each entry helped me rewrite the narrative. I wasn't weak for falling. I was strong for surviving. Months passed, and one day, I re-downloaded Tinder, not because I was ready to date again, but because I wanted to stop being afraid of it. I set firm boundaries, made it clear in my bio that I wasn't interested in games, and trusted myself to see red flags more clearly. Eventually, I did meet someone. Someone real. Someone kind. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't instant fireworks. But it was honest. And that made all the difference. I still think about Brad sometimes, not fondly, not with anger, but with a kind of distant empathy. Because people who treat others like that are broken in ways I hope I never understand. He may have gotten a laugh out of what he did, but I walked away with something stronger, self-respect. If you're reading this and you've been played, ghosted, or manipulated, please know it says nothing about your worth. You are not weak. You are not stupid. You are not too sensitive. You are human, and you deserve better. Always. I work in a restaurant in Moscow, not a fancy place, just a steady job that pays rent and keeps me fed. He was a photographer, all matte filters and gentle smiles on Instagram. We had the same birthday, which in the beginning felt like destiny and not just algorithmic coincidence. We started seeing each other in January, first coffees at, then long walks along the canal when the ice was thin, then small presents that made me stupidly happy. His favorite chocolates, a record with a cracked sleeve, a hand-painted card where he spilled ink like it meant something. It was romantic in that small, human way. He came to my shifts sometimes, brought my favorite snacks, remembered things I said offhand. He was sweet. By February, we made it official. "We're doing this," he said with that grin that suggested forever, and I believed it for a minute. I'm honest, I felt something. I'm not a princess, but when someone shows up reliably with flowers and your favorite tea, you warm. We were good together until the day I told him I was moving back to Chicago. I had family, a girlhood home calling me. It was practical, papers to sign, an apartment to sort, a plane to book. I said it softly because I did not want to hurt him. "I'll be moving in a few months," I told him. He looked at me funny at first, like a chess player considering the board. Then he smiled. "We'll make it work," he said. And because charm is a powerful drug, I nodded. But then the switch. Something in his face folded, like you fold a letter. He went from chipper bear to sudden storm. The next time we met, he was different. There was an edge in his words I hadn't heard before, like someone who'd rehearsed rage in the mirror and then performed it for real. He started asking me questions that were not questions but barometers. "How long have you been thinking about this?" he said. "When were you going to tell me?" He repeated that line like a wound. We had our birthday that spring. Same table at a sushi place I like, 2 glasses of wine, the little candle he put on my dessert, the card where he wrote too much. He had this beautiful way with words and ink, and I praised it because what's more tender than someone who takes the time to write? Later, he went to the bathroom, came back, kissed my forehead and said, "Everything will be fine." I thought he was joking about the move. Turns out, he wasn't. The ride home is where the voice mutates. The easy small talk became accusations. "You said we'd be together. You said you'd stay. How can you do this? You promised." He spoke faster. He demanded answers like a prosecutor. The man who'd sent me flowers an hour earlier now spoke as if I'd robbed him. I tried to be calm. I told him the truth. I was scared of a long distance, and my life was complicated. I tried to frame it gently. He didn't want gentle. He wanted certainty and blame. Back at my building, he grabbed a bag, slammed the door, and left. He didn't scream or throw things. He left like a door slamming on a picture frame. He texted for the next few hours. "You can't do this. I did everything. You owe me." I blocked him like I usually do when the texts mix apology with blame. I told a friend, "He's upset, let's give him space." That was the plan. The plan failed. 2 weeks later, the universe did a thing that still gives me the shivery kind of creep. I was driving into work early, morning fog, as Moscow fog does, sort of beautiful and sad. I parked outside and saw a man walking slow in the distance. He looked familiar in that way you recognize a certain gait. My stomach did a subtle flip. I thought maybe it's him, but no, it can't be, right? People see X's everywhere. I shrug and go in. Mid-shift, my colleague tosses a towel at me and whispers, "Wasn't that your guy in the car park?" I freeze. Somebody else must have seen him. I step outside under the sodium lamps and my heart drops. There he is, parked in a rusted old car, looking a little stunned and all kinds of unwell. He looks up, sees me, and his face collapses into something like regret and like pent-up fury. He walks towards me, and for a second the whole kitchen's noise becomes background. The sound of pans, the clink of cutlery, all turned into a slow-motion hum. He says, "I had to see you. I needed to know." His voice is half apology, half accusation. My phone buzzes with messages from friends. "Be careful." My brain is sharp and slow at once. At that moment you do the math. Someone who shows up at your workplace unannounced is not thinking about your comfort. He's thinking about his need to be seen. I told him to leave. Calm voice, no drama. "You can go now." He says, "I'm sorry. Please just talk." I say, "No. Not here." He looks at me as if I stole something valuable. He drives off. I shake. I call my sister. I close my shift early because I can't breathe with the weight of him outside. Then the next morning he is back. Not at my workplace, but on my timeline. A comment under an old photo, a message on a platform we once shared. He started to text me again and again, from his main number, then a new one, then an email. He wrote things that looped, sorrow, entitlement, the classic "you're overreacting" mixed with "why would you do that to me?" He didn't accept boundaries. He escalated in this quiet, corrosive way that made you doubt your judgment. It's the kind of thing where you begin to wonder if you were the unreasonable one. I filed the messages. Screenshots, dates, times. I confided in friends. My sister took my daughter for the afternoon. I have a child. That's important. My decisions aren't only mine. And said, "You do what you need." I went to work and tried to be normal and failed in ways I hadn't expected. My hands trembled a little while plating. My laugh turned brittle. Men like this don't do dramatic fireworks. They come in smothering waves that leave you exhausted. People told me to press charges. In Moscow, the police are a thing you use when you have proof of threat. I kept records. I also spoke to someone at a counseling center who told me to change routines, very times I left and came back, and inform my workplace. I did all of it. I told my boss, who was kind and said, "We'll put you on the safer side of shifts." My friends circled like good dogs and gave me rides home for weeks. It's astounding how much community matters when someone tries to edge into your life without invitation. The last thing he did was perhaps the most unnerving. One morning I saw a car that had been parked there since before I arrived, idling a little in the fog. I watched him get out and walk like someone trying not to be noticed. He looked like a man with a script written in his head that included me. I felt my body go very small. He started speaking like he was rehearsing apologies. "I didn't mean to scare you. It's just, I can't lose you." It sounded like a line from a movie, but no movie had permission to play this scene in my life. I told him short and final, in Russian because I wanted the clarity of sharp consonants. "Leave. Don't call again." He looked stunned, then angry, then almost sorrowful, and walked away. I locked my door and slept badly for months. The fabric shop smelled like a secret, cotton and mothballs and the faint, sweet tang of starch. It sat 3 doors down from the bakery, a narrow rectangle of light and shelves that rose like the ribs of some patient animal. I had been meaning to go for months, half because I wanted new curtains and half because the city's small, independent places have a way of making you feel less anonymous. The bell over the door jingled like a small, polite alarm. He was there. He stood behind the counter with his sleeves rolled to the elbow, the kind of posture that suggested someone had been taught the economy of motion. Hands doing small, deliberate work, eyes moving in the map of the shop. He introduced himself as Simon with a smile that made you think of shallow bowls, neat and practiced. He tied off a length of ribbon as if it were a small, private performance. I told him what I wanted: linen, something with weight but a soft fall. He recommended a swatch with the confidence of someone who believes in fabric as counsel. The first few visits were ordinary. I would go in, ask a question about lining or whether a pattern would suit my sofa, and Simon would answer with a practical demonstration, pulling out bolts and letting the light slip over them to show me what I needed to see. He measured with a tape that had seen the hands of dozens of people. He kept pins in a jar like a votive. Sometimes he would talk about the town, about a market stall that sold the best oranges, or the seamstress who could turn a sack into a dress with uncanny speed. It felt like the beginning of a small friendship, a barter of knowledge and time. Then he began leaving things for me to find. Not in a way that made me feel hunted. At first they felt like tiny kindnesses the world sometimes offers when people notice you. A square of chambray folded and placed atop a bolt with a note in neat script. Thought this would make lovely curtains. A spool of thread in exactly the shade of my hair, left on my doorstep with a plain card that read, "For when you mend the hem." Once, a parcel arrived with a hand-stitched handkerchief folded inside, its edges embroidered with tiny initials I recognized as mine. Whoever made the stitch had the kind of patience people reserve for prayer. I told myself these were gestures of someone who liked the texture of giving. People are kind in curious ways. I told my friend Nora about it. She smirked and said Simon had a reputation for being flirtatious with customers. "He's a romantic, not a stalker," she said, as if the distinction were obvious. I wanted to believe her. The gifts changed. The notes became more precise. "You looked tired when you came in yesterday." One read, folded and tucked into the seam of a curtain I'd bought. "This will make you sleep better," said another, attached to a weight of lead meant for hemming. He began to appear in places I had not mentioned to him. I would find him at the florist arranging a bouquet the same color as the thread he'd once left me, or across the street at the small antique shop where I bought a lamp. Each time, he would offer a small, easy smile and say, "Isn't this the perfect blue?" as if our taste had been quietly synchronized. The escalation was small at first, the sort of cumulative trespass that feels accidental until someone counts the steps and finds they're inside your house. He began to know things about me I had not given him, that I preferred Earl Grey in the afternoon, that my mother kept a chipped mug in the cupboard, that I read late into the night when it rained. He did not ask where he had learned these things. He folded them into conversation with the slyness of a person who has been keeping score. I set boundaries, polite, practical lines I thought would be adequate. "Please don't leave things at my door," I said the next time he handed me a bag with a package. "I appreciate the thought, but I'd rather pick up anything you might want me to have." He laughed then, the laugh that had become a small ritual, soft, a little too liquid. "Of course," he said. "Of course." He agreed, and for a while he honored the boundary the way a person honors a ritual, reverently but with the loopholes of habit. Then he began to come to my flat. It started with minorities of presence. He'd arrive with a curtain sample at my insistence and lingered to check tape measures. He'd offer to hang a rod for me since he happened to have the right screws. I told him no at first, and he stood there, hands in his pockets, patient as a stone. "I won't take long," he said. "If you'd rather, I can come another time." His language was a neat negotiation. I let him in, and we both pretended the decision was mutual. Once inside, Simon moved like an intimacy that had been rehearsed. He folded my laundry with the sort of ceremonial care a stranger is not entitled to give. He arranged cushions on my sofa with a patience that implied a knowledge of how I liked them. He left the kettle on the hob after we'd brewed tea and said, with the kind of offhand comment that contained a small claim, "If you ever need help with anything, I'm around." He lingered after he had finished or said he would leave, and the lingering became a small, persistent wait. People are resourceful at finding reasons to stay. He would run out of something at his shop and, on my way back from the grocer, stand in my hallway with a bolt of fabric under his arm. He would drop by to return a measuring tape and stay to watch a program I'd only half admitted I liked. He took to leaving the radio tuned to the station I favored, as if making habit the scaffolding of belonging. I started to notice how my days filled in the shape of him. The time I arrived at work, the milk I bought, the places my footsteps fell on the pavement. One afternoon, I found a note sewn into the hem of the new curtains I'd asked him to make. I had expected the expected, instructions about washing or an invoice. Instead, tucked in the fold like a small mechanical heart, was a scrap of paper with a message in his tiny, careful handwriting. "I think of you when I mend things." The sentence should have felt romantic or quaint. Instead, it felt like an inventory. It listed not what he thought but what he observed, the edges he could smooth, the ways he could make my world neater. I confronted him then, a momentary boldness that felt like a cheap silk dress I'd bought on a whim. "This has to stop," I said. My voice was steadier than I felt. "You can't be in my life like this. I appreciate your help, but it's too much." He listened with polite interest, folding his hands as if arranging a bouquet. "I don't want to pressure you," he said. "I only like being useful." There was a simplicity to his words that made them sound like truth. 2 days later, he came by with a small package, a cushion embroidered with a pattern I recognized from a napkin I had once left in a cafe. This time, rather than being surprised, I felt something colder, a pressing possibility that his usefulness was the currency he had chosen, and he had begun spending it without my permission. I asked him to leave. He kissed my forehead as if he had been offered the last polite space. The first time I saw him, he was standing under the street lamp at the end of my block like an afterimage, too still for a stranger, too deliberately placed for coincidence. It was late. The cold had that thin, clean edge of early winter, and the pavement shone with last week's rain. He wore a suit that looked borrowed from an old photograph, the lapels narrow and a little too long for the era. What made me stop was not the suit but his face. It looked as if somebody had sketched it on with a child's pencil, an uncertain, emphatic tracing of eyes and mouth over a living person's skin. Up close the effect was worse. The lines were not simply makeup. They were the kind nurses used to mark surgical sites, the precise strokes of a cartographer turning a map of someone into an instruction. Black arcs at the temples, a thin pen line running from the corner of his lip down his jaw, a cross-hatched shadow where cheekbones should be. His eyes, the actual eyes, were the only human thing about him, restless, unmoored, watching the corner where I waited for the bus. He smiled in a way that was both polite and practiced, as if he had been rehearsing expression like a monologue. I told myself not to be nosy. I told myself the city was full of people experimenting with looks, and that perhaps he worked in theater or performance art. People wear masks for reasons we can't know. But there was a small crookedness to his posture, a way he held the weight of himself like a question that needed answering. When he shifted, the lines on his face caught the lamplight and made little shadows like knife edges. I felt suddenly very exposed, as if someone had drawn attention to what I thought was invisible about me. He followed the bus, not in the literal sense. He did not move to shadow my steps, but he drifted into the pool of light where I stood, and then into the cafe where I ducked to escape the cold. He ordered black coffee, sat at the corner table, and removed a newspaper despite no apparent interest in the headlines. I watched him through steam as if studying a photograph. He turned pages that he did not read. He kept his hands clasped like a person who had learned to fold them to keep from doing something more obvious. "Do you want to sit?" he asked, the voice a careful thing that matched the precision of his face. His mouth made the syllables gently, the way someone might speak to a sleeping child. I said no, because how do you say yes to a man whose face has been annotated by someone's anxious hand? I left the cafe shaking softly with the kind of adrenaline that coats the spine when something inscrutable tugs at the world's seam. Over the next week he surfaced in little constellations around my life. In the direction of the grocery store when I took the longer route, across from the lecture hall when my professor confessed to an anecdote, lingering at the crosswalk where I paused to tie my shoe. Each time he was careful, no sudden approaches, no direct contact, just the persistence of placement, a pattern you could trace if you liked to make maps out of the mundane. I made the mistake of asking a friend about him. "Oh, you mean the man with the drawing?" Lorna said like it was an ordinary nickname, tapping her cigarette ash into the cafe saucer. "He's been around for months. Thought he was performance art at first." She shrugged. "Now people just avoid him, which he likes. Makes him feel like an exhibit." An exhibit of what? I found myself cataloging the ways the drawn lines moved when he changed expression, the way the pen-stroked mouth stretched and left white where skin peered through, the way the eyes, real and searching, looked for a face to complete them. There was a hunger behind those eyes, not for food or shelter but for recognition, as if being noticed would patch the unnatural geometry someone had forced upon him. One night, returning from a late shift, I spotted him standing beneath my window. The drawn lines were softer in the wet air, ink bleeding like watercolors. He raised one hand and pressed it flat against the glass, the pad of his thumb smudging a small arc into the pane. I felt the prickle of a childhood superstition, like the subtle fear of leaving a window open to a thing that does not belong in ordinary houses. I drew the curtains and slept with my phone on the bedside table, light as sentinel. Days turned into a faint campaign of hints. Notes slipped under doors, a single wax card with nothing written but an outline of a face, a paper bag left on my stoop with a tangle of black thread inside, each thread knotted into a tiny perfect bow. Each object was anonymous and elaborate, a small theater of attention. They were not threats exactly. They were invitations with the edges filed smooth. Finally, curiosity defeated prudence. I accepted a route that walked past his usual bench in the park, and there he was, as inevitable as a season. He looked up when I approached, and for once, I did not have the option of slipping away. He gestured to the space beside him, as if we had agreed upon this moments ago. I sat. "You noticed," he said, as if merely stating a fact might be a confession. Up close the lines on his face were less grotesque and more tragic. The strokes looked like someone trying to draw a map over something that had already been lost. He folded his hands on his knees and watched the way a child watches a bird learn to fly. "Who drew on your face?" I asked because the question wanted to be asked, and because I needed the world to be a place where questions had answers. He smiled without moving his lips much. "I did," he said. "A long time ago." His voice was the voice of someone who has practiced softness. "It helps me remember." "Remember what?" He laughed, a small, lonely sound. "I don't know yet. Sometimes when the lines fade, I can't find myself. The drawing is an address. If I lose it, I might be someone else." He tapped the pen strokes as one might tap a map. "People forget who they are slowly, you know. You wake up and your things look like someone else's, like your coffee cup is new." The absurdity of the confession, admitting to drawing one's own face, suggested either a fragile honesty or a delusion. I wanted to be skeptical. I wanted, because it was safer, to call him a man bent under the weight of a private madness and go home to the ordinary lock of my door. But under the lamplight his eyes were not the eyes of someone lost in a fantasy. They were the eyes of someone checking whether the world would make room for a different kind of story. "Why mark yourself?" I asked. "Because marks make maps," he said simply. "And I forget. I forget what I am supposed to be if there isn't a line to follow." He reached into his coat and took out a small mirror. The reflected image in the silver was both his and not his. The drawn-on features lay like a borrowed script. "It's a way of being here," he said, "of saying I was not invisible." I wanted to ask who taught him to believe in drawn maps. I wanted to ask whether his lines came from play or injury or intention. Instead I talked about the weather, about traffic, about small trivialities that function as polite scaffolding when two people stand at a remove. He listened with the patience of someone who prizes the sound of consonants. I used to think my father's voice was only on the radio, a distant, tinny thing that arrived with weather reports and late-night ads, until the day I found the little cassette in the drawer. It was wrapped in a band of yellowing tape and labeled in his handwriting, "For when you need to hear me." I sat on the floor of my childhood bedroom with the cassette between my palms and felt something inside me tilt, as if the world had shifted its furniture and left a new doorway open. He had been gone 3 years by then, taken in a hurry that left everything unfinished. Projects stopped mid-sentence, a half-built birdhouse in the garage, a drawer full of mismatched screws. The house smelled different after he was gone, like someone had taken the kettle off the hob and left the room to cool. My mother moved through rooms like a ship at low tide, her movements smooth but weighed with memories. We joked, clumsily, that grief was an appliance we'd all been asked to learn to use overnight. The cassette was a private relic wedged behind a stack of fishing magazines, the sort of thing you imagine your father would have made with the awkward sentimentality of someone trying to stitch time back together. My fingers hovered over the play button, as if pressing it might break whatever spell had kept him in the past. I fitted it into the tape deck with reverence, and let the sound bloom in the small, ordinary room. His voice came out like a shape I'd been missing. It was the same cadence that read bedtime stories in the dark, the same rasp that hummed along to songs we played too loudly in the car. He spoke my name, and my lungs forgot how to be small. He had recorded not one message, but dozens, pieces of afternoons and advice and jokes. "If you don't know what to do, look at the hinges," he said on one track, then chuckled, as if imparting a crucial life hack. On another, he read a passage from a book he used to pretend he disliked, his voice breaking the way it did when he tried not to cry. At first I listened to the cassette in bursts, a tiny map of him I could consult between errands. I learned the rhythm of his laugh in the spaces between words. I learned the way he pronounced a place name wrong with loving persistence. My mother found me, weeks into this private ritual, curled on the couch with the tape deck at my knees and tears running down my face the way summer rain runs off a car window. She didn't ask me to stop. She made 2 cups of tea and lit a candle and sat down beside me, as if the 3 of us might share a single private joke. The recordings were practical as well as sentimental. He left instructions for things we never imagined would need instructions. How to reset the boiler when it coughed, where the spare key lived, the code to the shed that he'd told us was unbreakable because nobody would ever suspect the old flower pot. He told stories about his own childhood in the small, comic way parents make themselves human to their children. A boy who swallowed a pencil one summer and lied so convincingly about it that he convinced even the family dog. But woven through the practical and the comic was a thread that made the cassette feel less like a keepsake and more like a living thing. He asked questions he couldn't possibly know the answers to. "Are you eating enough? Who are you laughing with?" He left instructions soft as petals. "Never stay in a job that makes your hands ache for reasons other than work. Call when the light is good because things look better in morning sun. Forgive people for being small because we are all small sometimes." Days folded around the tape. I started taking small pilgrimages through the house to places that felt newly charged. The kitchen where he'd taught me to chop an onion without weeping, the garage where his tools hung like a cathedral's choir. I found the little changes he'd left for us, a note tucked under a jar lid, a sticky taped receipt with the words, "Buy milk." "Don't trust the supermarket brand." A post-it on the inside of a cupboard read, "If you're reading this, I probably thought you could use a laugh." Whoever had written those small, mundane jokes had meant to leave comfort in the seams of things. Listening to him, I started to behave differently in the world. I fixed things I'd left to rot, the squeak in the back door, the loose tile in the porch. I called my sister more often. I found myself saying the things he had said, lighter advice that folded into conversation like a well-worn shirt. At the same time, a dull ache grew, a hunger that the recordings could not fill. They were not a clock that could be wound up to make him present. They were a bridge I could cross to visit only for a while. One night, the cassette stuck. The tape cramped, a clump of itself, and the deck shuddered with a small, humiliating death. The voice on the other side of the spinning reels became a warbled ghost. I tried to coax it back to life, soft fingers fumbling with the mechanism. My attempts were clumsy and sacred. The house listened with its usual patient, indifferent ear. I thought of taking the cassette to a place that could digitize it, some modern priesthood that could translate magnetic memory into the cold convenience of digital files. The idea felt practical and sacrilegious at once. My mother had another plan. She took the cassette from me, wrapped it in a cotton handkerchief, and placed it back in its drawer. "It's more than a file," she said quietly. "It's a thing you hold." I understood then that the physicality of the tape, the way you had to press the buttons, the small ritual of thread and reel, was part of its purpose. It forced you to be deliberate about remembering. Months passed. The cassette did its work by soft degrees. It became a shape in our lives like a habit, a way to nurse grief into something that would not refuse to be seen. We would play it on anniversaries, or when the boilers broke, or at 3 in the morning when the house felt too big. Sometimes the recordings were funny reminders, sometimes they stabbed at the places that would not heal. Neither of these outcomes was wrong. There were nights when I imagined him standing in the doorway, not as a ghost, but as the man who habitually misread wind directions and always left the car lights on. I would set the cassette on the shelf and whisper things into the emptiness like a person who had learned to talk to the walls. I began leaving little messages for myself in the same voice he had used in the tape, a note on the fridge that read, "Don't forget to laugh today," or a post-it near the mirror, "Water the basil." My first encounter with the house was a mistake the map had made for me. A wrong turn on a road I thought I knew, a lane that narrowed and disappeared under a canopy of sycamores until the world felt wrapped in green. It sat at the end like an afterthought, slate roof sagging a little, porch swing hung like a comma. From the road it read like a film set, beautiful in an uneasy way, the kind of place people put in stories when they want nostalgia to smell faintly of mildew. I parked because the sky looked like tarnished coins, and because curiosity is a thing that announces itself in the body as hunger. The front door was half open. Inside, the house smelled of lemon oil and dust, of books left face down in curtains that hadn't been drawn in a while. Photographs crowded the mantel, black and white portraits, a dog mid-bark, a wedding shot frozen like a handshake, and a stack of well-thumbed books lay on the coffee table with bookmarks made of torn leaves and old receipts. She was there the moment my foot hit the floor, not standing in some theatrical pose, but folded into the geometry of the room. A woman smoothing the sleeve of a sweater with the small, precise motions people use to make the world seem less sharp. When she looked up, she had the kind of polite surprise reserved for strangers who are briefly allowed to exist. "Can I help you?" she asked, voice small and exact. Her name was Margot. She offered tea without waiting for an answer, poured with a steadiness that suggested this was not the first interruption of the day. She told me, between the clink of porcelain and the steam, that she was restoring the house slowly, that she liked to leave rooms empty for the ghosts. There was a dog, Toby, who evaluated me with the solemn optimism of animals certain they exist to be loved. Rain stitched the windows while we talked about carpenters and the bakery down the lane, and the neighbor who'd once painted his fence the wrong blue and regretted it. Margot spoke of the town as if she had been threaded through it for years. She knew people's names the way others know recipes. We began to see each other, the way people do when there's a soft gravity. Coffee on her porch in raw, pale mornings. Exchanges of books with dog-eared endorsements. An invitation to a film she loved, described with the kind of affection that makes you want to see what she saw. She called to tell me about an old woman who needed groceries, about a fence that sagged, about a stray cat that had finally learned the back door. Her voice slipped into my week with the lightness of something domestic and reassuring. I liked the cadence she brought into my solitary life. It felt like belonging. Small things could have been warnings. She seemed to know where I would be if I mentioned an errand. She turned up at the market the minute I thought about bread. I told myself these were marks of friendship, of someone who paid attention. Mostly I wanted not to be alone. Attention felt like antidote. Affection, if fed only on attention, tends to harden into ownership. Margot's questions narrowed. "Where were you at 3? Who were you with? Why didn't you answer?" Her apologies arrived as pies and notes tucked into pockets. "Sorry if I worried you." Each apology smoothed the tentative boundaries I had tried to set. Then she began leaving things. Little tokens first, a skein of yarn in the blue of sea, a compact mirror with initials etched inside, a carefully folded hand-drawn map of the lane with an X at a spot where the wildflowers grew. They always came at moments when I was vulnerable, after a bad day, after my mother's voice on the phone, and I found myself keeping them in a drawer I told nobody about. The gifts felt like breadcrumbs across a path I had not realized I was walking. One afternoon, there was a key on my kitchen table. Brass, worn to a soft shine, heavy in a way that made it feel ceremonial. A note lay beside it. "For when you need to leave and don't want to wake me." The intention could have been practical. Still, the key in my hand became a small, insistent weight. I told myself the gesture was kindness. I learned what a fine line there is between kindness and trespass. I tried to make distance. I learned a script, late replies, declined invitations, soft assertions of needing time for work. Each retreat was met with perfect timing. A basket of oranges on my step, a note that read like contrition, a sudden knock with a casserole. The key reappeared where I had placed it, then where I had not, then on top of the stack of books I'd been reading that morning. The gesture shifted from thoughtful to invasive without a single dramatic moment to point to. The change was slow, a theft committed one extra question at a time. Once, haunted by a cold clarity I could no longer ignore, I walked the lane to her porch. The swing moved even though there was no wind, like a slow pendulum keeping time with its own secret. I knocked until my knuckles ached. She opened the door and held out her hand, palm up, and there were the keys I'd been finding around my flat. "You keep losing things," she said softly. I thought I'd help. Anger would have been satisfying. To toss the key into the lane and watch it disappear under leaves would have felt like punctuation. Instead, I felt something colder, a small, precise understanding that this was not about keys. It was about a person who could not accept a version of me that excluded her. It was about entitlement growing in the spaces where attention had once been welcome. I left after that, and left for good. I moved into an apartment facing a busy street and installed locks that made small, authoritative clicks. I sent a text that was clean and final. She replied with punctuation I could not parse. A bouquet of wildflowers, a photo of the lane at sunrise captioned, "I miss our mornings," an apology that read like a comma. They started as links in my inbox, a subject line like a small present. "For Eliza, thought you'd like this." The first playlist was 10 songs long, a neat, thoughtful arc of old jazz, and a couple of brittle indie tracks I'd loved in college. Whoever sent it had an ear that matched mine. I played it on a rainy afternoon, and the living room filled with an oddly companionable soundtrack. A single, unnamed person had sat down somewhere and thought of me, and then bundled that thought into a playlist. It felt intimate and faintly flattering, like someone leaving a rap book on your doorstep. There was no note, no name. The sender's address was an anonymous string. I replied with a thank you, and a small smile pasted onto the face I saw in the mirror. That should have been the end of it. Instead, the playlists kept coming. They arrived with the regularity of a bus schedule. Every few days, new lists with titles that slid from friendly to uncanny. Rain Morning, For When You Miss Your Mother, songs to fix a broken shelf to. The music was always good. Sometimes a track had lyrics that fit a moment I'd had that day. The line, "You keep the curtains closed," a lyric somewhere in a hushed verse, and my stomach would do something tiny and sharp. I found myself cataloging coincidences and wondering whether coincidence could be practiced until it felt less random. At first I told myself it was an admirer, thoughtful, perhaps lonely, using playlists like notes. I liked the idea. I began to look forward to the little envelope of sound. I made tea and played them on low while I washed dishes. I learned which song the sender favored when they wanted to be consoling versus the ones meant to be wry. It was a private ritual, 2 lives overlapping through a third medium. Then the playlist began to include fragments, not songs but recordings. Short clips, the clack of my front door as I left for work, the rattle of the bus I took on Tuesdays, the muffled laugh of a friend I'd been with the night before. They were not full conversations, only sounds, but sounds are terribly specific. You don't mistake the way a stair creaks or the particular cadence of a laugh. My hands would go cold. Once, I opened one titled Tuesday Morning and found the exact rhythm of my coffee maker as it gurgled while I stood in the kitchen, bare-backed and unready for the day. I changed my email password and set the mail to go straight to a folder. The sender's address was a ghost, each message routed through a different account, like a person who learned to walk through alleys to avoid being seen. When I mentioned it to Mara, she said the right thing: block, report, don't respond. I did those things, mechanically, and with the sour relief of someone doing paperwork against a feeling that is teeth. But even blocking one account felt like stepping on a single tile in a long mosaic. The tiles shifted and another face show up. The sender's tastes grew more precise. A playlist titled When You Were Small arrived with a clip where a voice said my name as if reading it aloud from a photograph. Another playlist contained a 3-second recording of a park fountain I visited with a friend last month. I could hear, impossibly, the exact bench creak I'd sat on. I began to hear the world as evidence, as things the playlists might later restate. I stopped walking with headphones. I stopped leaving my phone on the kitchen table. There were other messages, woven between music like a new instrument. Screenshots of my social media, cropped just enough to show a photo of my new haircut. A snapshot of the cake I'd posted for my sister's birthday. Once, waiting for the kettle to boil, I opened my front door and found a small packet tucked under the plant pot by the step. Inside, a pressed daisy and a slip of paper with one line in tidy, indifferent script. "You looked lighter that day." The sentence was ordinary and monstrous at once. I stopped telling myself stories about romance. The playlists were a technology of intimacy, I had not been asked to consent to. Whoever sent them had collected the sounds of my life and rearranged them into something that made me feel like an exhibit. I called the police, and they took a report with the procedural sympathy of people who had heard others tell the same pattern 100 times. "We'll flag it," the officer said, which felt like a bandage applied to a bleed. They recommended changing accounts, securing devices, documenting everything. I did all of it, with the small, stubborn competence of someone trying to keep a life from being dismantled. The sender answered one night. The message was not through email, but a playlist shared from an account that made me face the person as if through glass. There was a single track saved to the top, a recording of someone humming, my mother's lullaby, the one she used when I was small, rendered faithfully and too close to perfect. The playlist title read simply, "Listen." I played it, hands shaking. Midway through the humming, a quiet voice said, as if delivering a small, casual fact, "I like the way you leave the light on when you read." It could have been a mistake, a cruel coincidence. I let it be for a week, then shrank my life into routines that felt like armor. I moved the reading lamp to the far side of the room. I started leaving lights on at odd hours and off at others. I stopped accepting packages. I told friends to meet me in public and to text me when they arrived. The playlists did not stop. They adapted, like a person learning to play chess against a novice who refuses to open with something different. The moment I lost patience was small and precise. Mara and I had dinner. We laughed about some minor indignity of city life. I left her at the bus stop and walked home under a sky that was the color of coal. On my doorstep, in the seam where the mat met the wood, was a tiny cassette tape, obsolete and intimate, the kind of thing your parents used to swap mixtapes on. Someone had recorded something onto it. A slurred, rasping voice saying my name and the smell of the rain that evening, and a line about the way I tuck my hair behind my ear when I'm thinking. I opened the tape recorder I'd inherited from my father and listened with the punctiliousness of necrology. Whoever had left it had not hidden the tape in irony. They wanted me to know the exact moment I'd walked up the steps. I felt a heat behind my eyes that was less like anger than a rope tightening. I removed the tape and placed it in an envelope marked evidence, folding the paper like someone who meant it to be a legal object and not a talisman. I went to the police again, this time with the tape in my bag and a list printed of all the playlists and the dates they had arrived. They took it more seriously, or perhaps they had the patience for it that second-time incidents engender. There were officers who knew how to trace metadata, who could triangulate a pattern through the seams of streaming services and hosting accounts. There was a technical language that felt like armor, IP addresses, headers, timestamps. I waited in the fluorescent corridor of the station like a person holding her breath because she was afraid someone might take it away. He started as a courtesy, the sort of small, useful thing that feels like civility and then quietly becomes a language. The first time I saw him, he was bending over the communal mailbox with the kind of concentration people reserve for puzzles. He handed me a stack of envelopes I hadn't yet reached for and said, "You forgot these." His voice was flat, polite, the kind that could be folded into any neighborhood anecdote. I thanked him, and he smiled like someone who keeps a list of people's names in his head. His name was Peter, and he worked nights at the archives down the street. He had the practiced economy of someone used to handling other people's things. Envelopes, letters, the brittle intimacy of pages that belonged to strangers. He was small in the body but large in attention. After that first encounter, he noticed the little rhythms of my life as if cataloging were his profession. When I favored the left-hand row of mailboxes, he'd place a note there with a weather update. When I missed the recycling day, he'd leave a sticky note on my door reminding me. His handwriting was careful, an unshowy script that made even a reminder feel like a benediction. At first his attentions were convenient. He would water my neglected plants when I went away, fold mail in neat stacks when the postman had been lazy, and once he saved a package that had been left in the rain. He knew the barista's name at the corner cafe and the best shelf at the bookstore for paperbacks. He was the kind of person who offered small, reliable help and then retreated into the background as if that were the most natural of things. When I told friends about him, they said what friends always say about helpful neighbors: be grateful, enjoy it, don't think too much. I took their advice because gratitude softens the edges of discomfort and because, frankly, his help made a tired life easier. I let him into the architecture of my days by degrees. He knew what I did on Tuesday mornings, the way I liked my coffee when I left for work. It was a small ledger of familiarity that felt warm and domestic. Then familiarity became expectation. He began leaving little items at my door that fit too precisely into private corners of my life. A bar of soap of a brand I'd joked about loving, a tiny notebook the exact color of a sweater I had once mentioned, a bookmark clipped from a magazine I'd paused on. Each item came without flourish, just a plain note. Saw this and thought of you. Thought of you. 3 ordinary words that rearranged themselves into an architecture of attention. I told myself it was kindness. I told myself it was the good neighbor the world used to assume people would be. I thanked him. I accepted an offer to look after his keys when he was away. I told myself that the right thing was to be gracious until there was proof to be otherwise. Proof came in small, invasive increments. He began to anticipate needs I hadn't admitted. If I mentioned in passing that a pipe had leaked in the bathroom, the next morning there would be silicone in my shopping bag and a note. Fix the drip. I appreciated the gesture and answered with a thank you that felt damp with relief. But the relief was mixed with a tightening, the sense that someone else had started to rearrange the perimeter of my life in ways I had not authorized. He showed up at places where I did not expect him to be, at the little gallery an hour earlier than I had said I would go, at the farmer's market when I lingered by the apples. He would appear with a piece of news or a fact about a person I had only just mentioned, delivered as if sharing gossip rather than cataloging my days. "Your sister emailed?" he'd say casually when he had no business knowing. Little things, and then little more things, until I began to measure my own movement by whether he might be watching. The escalation felt like a gradual climate change. One morning, after a night when the wind had been loud enough to rattle the windows, I found a postcard slipped under my door. On it was a photograph of a pier at dawn, and on the back a line, "You walked past here last week." It was not a boast so much as a map. It placed me where I had been and, with the neatness of his pen, made me visible. I stared at the sentence until the ink blurred like a bruise. I asked him directly over the mailboxes whether he'd been following me. He smiled as if the question were a private joke. "Following isn't the right word," he said. "I keep things safe." He held up his hands like a man arranging proof in the air. There was a civility to the gesture that made it hard to name as wrong. But when I said firmly that I preferred my comings and goings to be unremarked, his eyes slid away in a way that suggested the ledger in his head had been balanced by more than one column. He kept trying to help in ways that made boundaries porous. He offered to water my plants when I returned from a weekend. He left a key in the little bowl by my door that I had never handed him. I found it 2 days later, and his handwriting curled on a note. "In case." The word felt like a bridge without a toll booth, an assumption of entrance. I changed the lock. He asked why. I told him simply, "I want to decide who has access." He nodded and said he understood. The nod felt like a temporary treaty. One night I came home to find my apartment rearranged. Not a violent violation, no forced drawers, no ransacked shelves, but small shifts that felt like someone had walked through the house with an idea of how it ought to look. A photo gone slightly askew, a cushion fluffed and turned the precise way he liked when he'd visited. On the kitchen table lay a small folded paper. Inside was a list of items, written in his tidy hand, things he'd noticed. The chipped mug, the plant that needed more sunlight, the coat I'd been meaning to mend. At the bottom, "If you'd like, I can come by and fix these." I called him, and my voice was flat. "Please don't come inside my flat unless I ask," I said. "Please don't leave things at my door." He listened as if he were filing a new category of neighborly preference. "Of course," he said. "I only want to be useful." What terrifies about people like him is that they are almost always kind in the way a tide is kind, persistent and slow. He honored the words for a time, but kindness is a habit, and habits reroute themselves around the obstacles we lay before them. Notes began to reappear. A dish he'd noticed that I didn't use anymore, a recommendation for a film he thought I'd like, a list of repairs he'd taken care of while I was out. Each letter slid into my life like an uninvited hand smoothing a blanket over me. It reached a tipping point the day I found a small voice message on my phone. There was no number, only the sound of a street, and then his voice, quiet and licit, saying, "I liked watching you read on the bench today." The sentence was intimate and blunt in the same breath. I felt, absurdly and physically, that someone had taken inventory of a private pleasure and logged it for their own record. I told him, finally, that our acquaintance needed gravity and boundaries. I would not accept notes, packages, or uninvited visits. I would not allow my movements to be logged. He listened with an expression of wounded civility and then, after a breath, said, "I'm sorry. I only wanted to be close." The apology was melodic enough to be meaningful, but the truth of it remained a thing he had to learn, not a fact he could be given. The first sign was a key in my coat pocket that I didn't remember picking up. It was brass and warm from someone else's hand, the kind of key that fits a front door with patience and a certain history. I found it the morning my apartment smelled of coffee gone cold, and the sky outside was the kind that makes the city look like it's been painted in watercolors. For a second I thought maybe I'd been careless, maybe I'd handed it to someone and forgotten. Then I remembered no one had had reason to be given a key. Across the hall lived Ava, who ran the florist downstairs and knew everyone's birthdays as if they were small liturgies. We'd nod in the stairwell, exchange gossip that tasted like sugar, and sometimes borrow sugar in the thin hours before a delivery. She was the person who brought me a sprig of rosemary the day I said, offhand, that I had killed the basil on my windowsill. "Try again," she'd said, pushing the pot into my hands. People in the building had a habit of being generous in the way that keeps neighborhoods warm. I assumed the key was one of those unremarkable kindnesses. I left it in a bowl by the sink and forgot, as you forget small conveniences you didn't need to think about. A note followed a week later, folded into the pages of a book I'd lent Ava the month before. It said in her tight, looping hand, "I thought of you in the market. Left this. Hey." The handwriting was ordinary and kind. The note accompanied a packet of seeds, lupins the color of dusk, and I felt the grateful tilt of someone who has been given flowers before. Then the moments multiplied. Ava began to know which postcards I liked, which brand of tea I pretended was fancy, the exact tilt of my favorite mug. She would appear at the lobby with a loaf of bread she just happened to have picked up for me, or she'd send a bouquet of inconspicuous greens with a tag that read, "For when you work late." Her favors were small and wrapped in the sort of thoughtfulness that makes you feel seen. I accepted them the way you accept help when you are tired, with gratitude and a softening of the edges that keeps loneliness at bay. There were things I should have noticed sooner. She always arrived when I mentioned leaving the house, as if the sound of my intention was a summons. If I said I'd be at the laundromat, she turned up half an hour later with coins, and if I spoke about a book, she would appear asking how I liked the author. I told myself I enjoyed the attention. It wasn't until she began to stand a little too long in doorways that my stomach would settle into an unfamiliar shape. My attempt at boundary making was tentative and polite. "I really appreciate what you do, Ava," I said once at the stairwell, "but you don't need to bring me things." Her smile was blank for a beat, as if the sentence had not been fully received. "Of course," she said then. "I just like helping." She put on the kind of expression people use when they translate disappointment into a neutral tone. It was easier to keep the peace than to argue with someone whose kindness felt like weather. Slow escalation is an art of inches. The key I'd found reappeared on my pillow one night, wrapped in tissue and smelling faintly of citrus. There was a postcard pinned to my door with a photograph of the bench in the park where I read on Sundays. On it she'd written, "I sat here today. Thought you'd like to know." The postcard felt like an adverb, a modifier to my life, tidy and domestic and invasive all at once. I began to alter routines. I stopped leaving my phone on the kitchen counter. I changed the day I walked to the market. But every time I moved, the small accommodations followed like a shadow. There was a night when the pattern crystallized into something sharper. I came home to find the apartment lightly rearranged. My shoes aligned with a neat, almost ceremonial precision. The cushions folded into symmetrical triangles. The curtains pulled to a precise breadth that made the living room look like a shop window. On the coffee table sat an origami boat, made from a page torn from a book I'd left open, and a note that read, "You weren't here when the rain began." The house felt like someone's careful diorama, and not my private place. I told her directly then, with a steadiness that was more practiced than felt. "Ava, this is too much. You can't come into my flat and tidy things without asking." I expected offense or confusion. She opened her mouth and, for a moment, looked like someone trying to remember which script to perform. Then she said softly, "I only want everything to be as you like it." The sentence was a kind of confession and an accusation. As you like it, meaning, if I can make everything align, you will like me back. I moved out for a week. I told no one I would be gone. I packed a bag and slept at a friend's and let the city hold me without the architecture of my routines for a little while. It felt fugitive and necessary. I thought maybe absence would make the pattern break. When I returned, the key was on the table, and there were 3 small sprigs of rosemary arranged like a miniature wreath on the doormat. In a voice that had learned to keep calm as a tool, I called the building manager and asked whether anyone had access to my flat. "No," she said, "but Ava is very helpful." Her voice carried the mix of affection and annoyance neighbors have for each other. Confrontation unspools differently than you expect. I sat across from Ava at the cafe beneath her shop, the noise around us soft and domestic. I told her I needed her to stop coming into my home, to stop leaving things, to stop making my life a series of responses to her attention. She listened with the patient face of a person whose hurt becomes a project for justification. "I thought we were friends," she said. "I thought you liked having me nearby." Her words were not false. I had liked her. Affection had been the soft scaffolding under which the problem grew. She offered reasons that sounded like apologies, neat and practiced. A lonely childhood, a fear of being forgotten, a hobby that required company. She meant them, I believed some of them. But I also understood that wanting help is not permission to inhabit someone else. I asked for a clear boundary. "Do not come to my flat unless I invite you," I said. "Leave packages at the door if you must, but don't enter." She said she would try. She nodded with the sincerity of someone who believes trying absolves consequence. Months passed in a brittle compromise. She honored the surface of the rule and violated the borders of its spirit. Notes slid under the door instead of keys left on pillows. Flowers appeared at my window each morning like small bells of apology. The building's residents grew accustomed to the exchange and adopted it with a mixture of exasperation and resignation. I changed my locks for the second time and kept my curtains drawn until dusk. I began to document an almost ceremonial cataloging of times and gifts and the ways the walls of my life had been nudged. One evening, after a day threaded with the kind of anxiety that makes decisions heavy, I found a package in the hallway that made me laugh and break at the same time. A sweater she had knitted, the yarn color clumsy and warm, with a sleeve stitched too long. Inside the collar she had embroidered, in minuscule letters, my initials. It was unbearably intimate and unbearably kind. I sat on the stair and held the garment like an accusation. Selim was unlike anyone I'd ever met online. His Tinder profile was minimal. A few crisp, high-contrast photos, him in a tailored navy coat by a lake, another in a bookstore cafe, hunched over a leather-bound volume. It was vague, pretentious maybe, but intriguing. We matched on a stormy Thursday night. I was curled up in bed, wine glass half full, swiping more out of boredom than hope. His first message came within minutes. "Is your mind as captivating as your eyes?" I roll, but I replied, "That first conversation? Electric." Selim was articulate, philosophical. He asked questions that weren't just about favorite colors or weekend plans. He wanted to know what kept me up at night, what kind of legacy I wanted to leave, what I thought about the concept of intergenerational trauma. It was intoxicating, the kind of mental stimulation that made my body respond before I even realized it. We chatted for days. Texts turned to voice notes. Voice notes turned to late-night video calls where I'd lie in bed, one hand under the blanket, the other holding my phone as he whispered about art, psychology, desires. There was tension. He never said anything overt, but his voice alone, low, deliberate, made my skin tingle. I caught myself pressing my thighs together whenever he called me darling, his accent curling around the word like silk. When we finally met in person, it was at an old botanical garden he suggested. Somewhere quiet, somewhere alive, he'd said. Selim was even more magnetic in person. Tall, sharp-featured, with a calculating sort of grace. He kissed my hand when we met, kissed my hand, like he'd stepped out of another time. I should have seen that as the first red flag. The date was oddly formal. He asked about my family. A lot. Not just the usual, where are your parents from? But things like, do you know your great-grandmother's maiden name? And have you ever done a 23andMe test? I laughed it off. What? Are you building a family tree? He smiled. Something like that. We ended the date at his apartment, a loft with cathedral ceilings and a wall of books organized by language. The air smelled faintly of sandalwood and something herbal. As we stood by his kitchen island, sipping herbal cocktails he'd made, he leaned in. "You're even more fascinating than I imagined," he murmured, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. "I want to know everything about you." When we kissed, it was slow and deliberate. He didn't rush. His hand traced the curve of my waist as if memorizing it. Every touch felt intentional, studied, like he'd been planning it. I should have pulled away, but I didn't. We ended up on his couch, the velvet catching bare skin as our clothes slipped off piece by piece. He worshipped my body with a reverence that was almost unnerving. Every move was measured, like he was learning a map, or charting territory. I felt possessed, desired, but also examined. Afterward, as I lay with my head on his chest, he ran his fingers through my hair and whispered, "You're exactly what I've been looking for." I thought he meant it romantically. The next few weeks were a blur of intense connection and growing unease. Selim would show up at my place with rare books, supplements for reproductive health, and ask if I'd ever considered preserving my genetic material. I laughed, thinking it was some abstract conversation. But he wasn't joking. He began dropping strange comments. "You'd make beautiful children." Or, "Your bone structure has such classical symmetry." I thought it was flattery, creepy flattery, but flattery nonetheless. Then one night, we were lying in bed, post-coital glow still warm, and he said it. "You know," he whispered, tracing lines on my stomach, "we'd make a genetically ideal pair." I laughed nervously. "What?" He turned serious. "I've studied this. Our backgrounds, our traits, they align perfectly. You're Northern European with Ashkenazi roots, high verbal IQ, no major hereditary illnesses. I've done the math." "The math?" I repeated, sitting up. He nodded. "I've been looking for someone like you for years. Someone to build something meaningful with. A legacy. Not just emotionally, but biologically." The air in the room shifted. My heart thudded. He kept going. "I don't believe in leaving something as important as reproduction to chance. The potential of the human genome is wasted on impulse. But you could change that. With me." I stared at him, naked under his linen sheets, and realized I didn't feel flattered. I felt hunted. "I think you should leave," I said quietly. He blinked, surprised, but didn't fight it. "You're overwhelmed." "I understand. The idea of legacy frightens most people." I dressed silently and left. The messages started the next day. Dozens. He wasn't angry. He was persuasive. Calm. Like a recruiter. He sent me articles about genetic matchmaking, then audio clips of him explaining his vision. He insisted this wasn't about control, it was about destiny. That we were biologically aligned. That I was wasting my potential by walking away. When I blocked him, he used new numbers. Then emails. Then LinkedIn. A week later, I came home to find a package on my doorstep. Inside was a printed binder titled, "Our Potential Lineage, Projected Traits and Advantages." It was filled with charts, genetic assumptions, even AI-generated images of what our children might look like. I threw up in the sink. I called the police. They said it wasn't technically illegal. I changed my locks. I installed cameras. I started sleeping with a heavy flashlight by my bed. The final straw came when my sister messaged me. "Hey, weird question. Did you tell some guy named Selim my maiden name?" He had reached out to her. That night, I wrote one final email. I told him that if he ever contacted me, my family, or anyone I knew again, I would file a restraining order, go public, and destroy whatever fantasy he had built. I attached a screenshot of the binder, labeled it evidence, and CC'd a lawyer friend in the email just to scare him. The messages stopped. But for months, I couldn't stop checking my back. I'd see someone tall and dark featured on the train and feel my skin crawl. My dreams were filled with whispered promises of legacy and bloodlines. I felt like I had been studied, cataloged, and discarded when I didn't fit the mold. Eventually, I returned to dating. Slowly. Carefully. Now, when someone asks about my family history on the first date, I smile politely and excuse myself. I don't care how hot they are. I don't care how good they are in bed. If someone's more interested in my DNA than my Spotify playlist, I'm out. Selim wanted a partner he could mold into a vessel for his vision. I wanted someone who could love me for my mind, my flaws, and yes, my messy, unpredictable humanity. I still believe in legacy, but not the kind he meant.